Wow, this is crowded quite fast. Thank you for that. So welcome to the Rose. Appreciate you coming here and visiting this labor of love that Aon and all the Rose design team and the community and so many people, it would take me the entire hour to name everybody, participated in to make this change. I'm sure you've all known Hope Community for a long time, who started in this neighborhood and had a bigger vision, so they have been our amazing partner in all of this work. And Will was here somewhere earlier, so if you haven't met Will, please take a chance to visit Will and learn more about Hope Community. So I'm Gina Saganek. I am a senior advisor to the Healthy Building Network, and we're here today to talk about materials. Some of you known me for the last 18 years. I've been saying I've been working for Aon. I was formerly the Vice President of Housing Development, so had a huge role in part of this project and the ones you see around us. So we're here today to talk about materials and health. And I had a feeling that this room wouldn't be so full that we had to, bring people extra chairs, because it's such an unknown conversation right now for the most part. I've been learning a lot. So I'm going to have my cohorts here take 2 seconds to introduce themselves, and then we'll get on with the presentation.
So I'm Reese McPherson. I'm with Meyer Shamrock Castle Architects, also known as MSR Design. So I'm a project manager. I've been with MSR for 24 years. I love what I do. And I'm very passionate about this type of work. It really does mean a lot about creating homes for people, but now in adding on this layer about what health and what wellness means, and really taking on the challenge of LBC and really delving deeply into that. And it's been great. It's been kind of three things with it. There's been first a lot of discussion, a lot of argument, and a lot of considerations. And those are all three really important things, and that comes because of trust. And that is a big group. And that's one of the things I really have enjoyed the most about this whole process, is in order to argue, you have to be passionate, and you have to have a lot of trust in order to do that in an open environment. And that's been one of the great things that have come out of this.
Hi, I'm from New York. You might wonder why I'm here. So I'm part of an organization of 4 organizations that have come together to really look at transforming the products that are used in affordable housing and to create healthier options for specifiers, for architects, for developers and owners. And we met Gina in April, came out here in June, and director of the Healthy Materials Lab at Parsons School of Design in New York. And we as a research lab started to observe the great work that is happening here at the Rose. And it's become an intensive study for us. A group of us have been following the work from the construction in June through to this amazing building that we see today, and trying to look for best practices and replication of this building in our work. So I'm very grateful to be invited. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks, guys. So I'm going to stand up because I like to move around when I speak, and I think I'll struggle to talk while I'm sitting down. And maybe I'll move over here because I can't see my sister behind the column. I can.
I wonder if she's paying attention.
Yeah, exactly. So I already introduced myself, but I do want to take a moment to introduce Bill Walsh, my new boss. He's the founder of Healthy Building Network, and he has been fighting relentlessly for a long, long time to create a healthy environment for us all. I'm coming at this from a perspective of, I would say more of a newbie in this idea of materials, but I've gotten sort of a deep dive working with the Rose and now being part of the Healthy Building Network. And so I'm learning too. And I always had this vision of home, like home sweet home, we often say. And we look around in our surroundings, and they're often incredibly beautiful. And they often change our emotions. And they often, connect us to places where we can relax and be with each other. But what I found is, when you really think about what our homes are made of, it's stuff that I still can't always pronounce, and it's in these bins of, who knows what, and often people have to wear outfits like this even to handle them. And I've also learned that there's very little regulation around toxic chemicals. There's a lot of regulation we know around food, and we see labels on food. Around medicines, there's lots of trials and requirements to disclose information, and we're comfortable with that. So why wouldn't we just think, when we show up into our homes and into rooms and into places, that someone looked into it and someone made sure it was healthy? Well, of the 80,000 chemicals and the act I should name that, the 1976, which Bill has taught me this, so this is new for me. But at that point, there was this control act that came along, but really at that point, it grandfathered about 60-some thousand chemicals in that didn't need to be tested. And from that time, there's over 80,000 different chemicals out there. 200 of them, the Environmental Protection Agency, and I purposely put that in blue because I thought the word protection was a little bit of an oxymoron there. But about 200 of those 80-some thousand chemicals have gone through some more rigorous testing, and 5 are actually regulated to a degree to protect us. So to me, I've started to get really inquisitive and sometimes nervous, really, about what is in all the things we're touching all the time and putting in our mouths and breathing in. And recognizing who all is affected. Well, certainly all of us are affected. I don't care if you're Bill Gates or you're in a homeless shelter. Everyone in between, we all have the same materials. But it is true that if you are Bill Gates and you are aware of the situation, you have options because you have money, and you can find someone to do the research, or you can pay premiums that are oftentimes associated with healthier materials. But what happens to lower income communities that don't have those means to pay that premium? There's not only the people living in the units, but the people building the units. I know, Dale Forsberg is here from Watson Forsberg, and he, has a lot of workers that are exposed every day, and, to get the information, to try and do transparency of what is in this material, it's almost non-existent right now. Also, from low-income communities, those are the folks working the manufacturing jobs. So they're out all day long working with chemicals and in jobs that are exposing them to all kinds of things that aren't healthy for us. So the magnitude of exposure for low-income communities, and if you look at many of the studies, poorer communities are affected more with asthma, with developmental delays, with all kinds of issues that aren't always necessarily tied back to our materials. Fence line communities, oftentimes the chemical plants and the manufacturing industries are put in places where they're low wealth communities. So it's exposure upon exposure upon exposure. And that's where I started to really realize we have to start paying attention to this. We have to start creating a movement here. We have to start demanding transparency and healthier materials, because it's affecting all of us, and it's affecting health and healthcare and all of our lives. But this is the one that makes me most startled. I always get chills when I look at this. There's studies by Environmental Working Group and by, if you research, in umbilical cord blood, there's often 200 or more industrial chemicals. So our babies are being born already with synthetic chemicals in their bodies. And that's when we are most frail and developing. And it's unbelievable that this is happening. So one of the reasons, we started thinking about healthy materials at the Rose was, we wanted to do different. We wanted a next generation. We used the Living Building Challenge to help us reframe how we are building our buildings, both from energy, water, all those kinds of things. But what about health and materials? And to be quite honest with you, at first, we said, yeah, we'll do low VOC paints and a few of the other catchphrases we've all kind of heard on a commercial before. But honestly, I had no idea what that really meant, to make a commitment towards healthy materials. And Reese will talk more about the details behind that. We recognized after we looked a little bit that it was going to take time. It was going to take money. It was going to take research. It was going to take a lot of head banging and begging and pleading to try information and then try to understand that. We were committed to that, and we were thankfully lucky enough to have some philanthropic partners who recognize the issues that are being created around this, and that we need to get people engaged and committed. And so we were lucky enough to have the philanthropic funds both to pay for the research side of it through Reese and his team, and for the premium on materials. So I'll let Reese talk a little bit more. I wanted just to set the stage and talk about why we care and why we should care.
So Gina had kind of segued in, and these three slides are actually also from Healthy Building Network, because I thought they were so incredibly appropriate to the images, and those are things that Bill Walsh had put together. But again, a really key fundamental piece is what Gina talked about with body burden, the image of the newborn. And these are the chemical lists that we're finding currently in umbilical cord blood on newborns, and right now only DDT and PCBs are the ones that are regulated. So again, just real briefly about the 83,000 chemicals and the 5 chemicals of asbestos, PCBs, dioxin, CFCs, and hexavalent chromium. Sounds like fun. So I'll back up for just a second. So part of the issues surrounding the roads was creating a high-performance building. So we really tackled the energy piece really head-on, went right for it. But materials also is just as rigorous. So, you know, to create a high-performance building, we started asking kind of all these questions about climate, where we live, what we do, how are we going to save energy, how are we going to get to the end of really be efficient and you know, create a new boat, or the next building of the next generation is kind of other catchphrases. So I kind of like to start off with this slide because this kind of gets at the heart of the matter. So in Minnesota, the 15 over there corresponds to 15 really bad snow days in a year that we typically have. 53 is the number of below 0 days that we typically have in a year. And 17 is the consecutive number of days below 0. So the question mark that we put here was, what is my utility bill going to be? And that was one of the questions that we asked a lot about energy, but the same can be asked of materials too. Well, what's my floor made out of? What are my walls made out of? What is it that I'm actually touching and I'm living with, since we spend 90% of our time indoors? And because energy is such a key piece, and kind of getting all these things right, because we are going to be inside 90% of our time, getting those things right is also important. Two are fundamentally tied together, is kind of what we found out. So the 10 over here is the 10 meteorologically perfect days in Minnesota. So supposedly there's only 10 perfect days here. It's not the Minnesota State Fair. This was a slide that CSBR actually put together that talked a lot about decision-making, prioritization, goals, and outcomes. And this rigor really applies towards not just energy, but also materials, and asking questions about simplicity, making it affordable, making it replicable, what is the appropriate fit, and finding that sweet spot. And that's really one of the key kind of questions we began to really ask about materials is, because we knew we couldn't do everything, how are we going to find the best material for the best situation and try to make better choices with it? So again, with the outside of the building, I mean, we spent a lot of time analyzing wall types, lots of discussion, lots of debates. The 23 wall types heavily analyzed to make the best fit, and really trying to make a nice tight envelope. But then we realized that humans need to breathe, so we had to really focus on how we were going to ventilate the space properly. Well, we can bring in a ton of fresh air, and that's one solution towards fixing indoor air quality. But it's also about what we're touching and what we're walking on, and looking at kind of all those kinds of things that really, all those things have to come together to make a difference. On the energy side of things, we talked a lot about that. We got to a 75% energy reduction, which is a really big deal. It's great. It really pushes us far forward. And the next piece of this is, how are we doing that with materials? How do we keep pushing and striving forward on it? So we started off with an EUI, which is energy use intensity, which is basically like miles per gallon. It's the easiest way to kind of think about it for a car. This is about what the building is using. And so it's a kBTU per square foot measurement. Typically, baseline buildings in our environment 119. Green communities, which is usually tied to most of our funding, is 65. SB 2030, which is the Minnesota challenge of trying to get to net zero buildings, is stating that at this time in our lives, we need to be at 52. Where we were moving towards was 31. And we looked at a lot of solar options and a lot of other things. But what we were finding was this issue with energy of kind of this end of efficiency. And in some ways, we're finding the same thing too with materials, that a lot of materials can only just take you just so far, and then you have to really look at other transformational materials that are going to take you to the next step. So again, this is kind of highlighted the kind of the energy pieces. So this is the intro slide into the materials and about doing our part. And this is actually an image that I grabbed from Gina because I really liked it, because this is what it's about. It's about doing our part. Because we don't want this, we don't want these types of pollutions, we don't want air pollution. And those are the things that we know about, we see them really easily. The issue is with our materials, a lot of what's in there is what we can't see. Gina had given that image of the vat of phthalates. Well, so many of the toxicants that we see in our environment, or that we know are in our environment right now, are things that we can't see. They accumulate slowly, they're found in the umbilical cord. They build up slowly over time, and those are the things that actually begin to matter. So in looking at the red list with Living Building Challenge, when we started the process, there were 13 kind of worst-in-class materials that are identified on the red list, things that you need to avoid in the chemical kind of soup that's made up of our materials. So of course, the first ones we know, asbestos, cadmium, lead, mercury, but going after the other ones are much harder, of the phthalates and polyvinyl chlorides, and getting after the chloroprines and the chlorofluorocarbons and kind of all those things. They're much harder to do because they're great material. In some ways, they're great chemicals because they do some wonder things, and it's hard to kind of find other substitutes. Now, there's been new chemistry, and those are changing. During this process, LBC continues to change what is being identified as kind of worst in class. And so even during this process, over the last 3 years of getting from design and bidding into construction, there have been big changes in the industry, and we've been able to actually incorporate some of those changes into the thing. And so now, Living Building Challenge has identified 25. So even in that short time frame of just a year and a half, that 13 became 25. And we're going to continue to see that kind of movement move up, which is a good thing. So in kind of looking at our materials, we began to ask some fundamental questions because we knew that we weren't going to be able to do everything with our materials. We began to kind of turn it a little bit on its head and say, okay, we know that people spend 90% of their time indoors. Let's start with our indoor environment where people actually are. So let's look at where people are going to spend our time. And so we actually challenged the Living Building Challenge and the Institute in talking about, we're going to turn this on our head. Rather than talking about building structure and everything that makes up the building, let's talk about where people are touching, and really concentrate on that. So of course, with Living Building Challenge, there's kind of 3 main attributes to it to consider. There's the red list, which are the chemicals that should not be, that have been identified as should not be in there. There's also a responsible industry and filter source location. So you're trying to figure out, is the industry that made it doing a great job? And then where is it coming from too, because that matters for the embodied carbon footprint. And we ran the thing through kind of those 3 filters, and we ended up looking at 40 material categories that were investigated. I'm not going to read them all off, but basically, again, it's looking at the walls, the floors, countertops, things that you touch. And we actually ended up having some really interesting discussions about this. And in some ways, as an architect, it seems like heresy to even say this, but does this all matter? What about, should we be supplying everybody with glass containers and get rid of the Tupperware? Would that make a bigger difference in people's lives than changing a countertop? And so we have a lot of discussions about that. I think it's a really important thing, because what we're quickly realizing is we can set the stage for quite a few things and make the right choices, but then there's this whole other piece that talks about engagement with people and learning, and really talking about how we're going to take this to the next step so that you really understand what you're actually putting in your body. Oops, wrong cover. So with LBC, this due diligence is simple when the manufacturer has disclosed it, and when they have not, it's hard work. One of the things that I kind of actually really liked about working on this project and learning more about Peace House and Sister Rose Tillman, and some of the things that she would say was one of her main quotes was, "Accept difficult work." Well, this was one of them. And accepting difficult work with grace is even harder. And I think that that was a key piece about that. And I really, really feel very strongly that this has such a long way to go, that this is really in its infancy. So we tried to actually chart out the process, and I realize it's a little hard to read. It looks like it almost reminds me of like flippers on a pinball machine. But basically, we were trying to diagram the process of taking a material through Declare, or taking it through a series of steps to try to get disclosure. And it was a method that we used to talk to Aon about why this is hard. And we went back to the Institute to actually talk about it. I said, well, you're the first people that actually ever diagrammed the process about how you run this thing through. That led us to actually revamp the tracking sheets that you normally use to track your materials and say how you're doing. And we needed a method to communicate amongst ourselves about how our materials were actually doing. And so like deeper shades of green, we knew that those were already on Declare, pieces that were lighter green. And so we kind of changed this and transformed it. And even the Institute really liked this process of engagement because it allows everybody to kind of be on equal footing and talk about things. So again, we talked a lot about what was going to go into the interior dwelling units. The big one, of course, we started with the floor because the floor is a very large surface. But more importantly, we really wanted to go after the drywall. The drywall is the most ubiquitous surface in a building. It's everywhere. It's your walls and your ceilings. And then, of course, the paint. During the course of the project, zero VOC paint with zero VOC colorants became available. And that was a big deal. Now, one of the other things that was very important that occurred during construction, which is unusual for a project, is that because of philanthropic partners and the ability to exercise contingency, we were able to add in back into the project several key components into there. And Weiss became a very active partner in helping us obtain fantastic pricing on things, and that was fundamental. Without that, none of this would have happened. And so what we were beginning to do was really then benchmark how could we reduce toxicants, still have a good return on investment, and make smart decisions, because what we were finding was we could specify a fantastic floor and we'd spend all our money on one thing. And it was, we said, okay, we really need to go beyond just one thing and try to figure out how we're going to affect those 40 things that make up the interior environment and try to spread that around. So looking at the, I don't know how many people have been on the tours, but anyway, kind of looking through it. So we looked at kind of this filtering process, and what an example is of like flooring choices: a base condition of VCT, which is vinyl composition tile, or sheet vinyls, carpet rolls, bio-based tiles, well sheet flooring and stuff, and kind of running them through, again, where they sit in the toxicity levels, using Pharos and other tools and methodologies to kind of look at that if they weren't on Declare, looking where they sit in the red list, and then benchmarking them against cost, and then kind of creating this kind of meter of, are they sitting in a red list zone or are they sitting in a zero VOC zone? Did the same thing again with wall choices and kind of looking through. And then applied that logic to the common spaces. One of the interesting things that happened was, yes, even though there were a series of upgrades that were done to the dwelling units, we were able to take a fair number of those logics and apply them towards the interior common spaces with very little cost upgrades, which I thought was fantastic. And then also during construction, a lot of these components, there became more things available. So we were able to, actually, a lot of the furniture that you're seeing in here, quite a number of these pieces 6 months ago were not on Declare. They're now on Declare, and we were able to bring those into the project. So not only were we able to affect change in the interior dwelling unit, we were able to affect change out here and into the furniture, and the movement is growing. And kind of ending on this slide with our community garden, because this is kind of what it's all about. It's creating a great place to be.
I'm not going to stand out like sitting because I have my notes I have to refer to. So As I said, we are part, Parsons Design Lab and the Healthy Materials Lab, are part of a consortium of 4 organizations, the Healthy Building Network, Gina is now part of, as Bill, our colleague, is also here, the Green Science Policy Institute, and Health Product Declarations Collaborative, and ourselves. So each represent different areas of expertise, and we are coming together as a partnership to try and tackle this really difficult problem. We've seen the kind of complexities of this space that we're working in. So we're taking on health and healthy materials, and we're taking on affordability. Those are our 2 main aims, and that's what we're trying to do. Here we are visiting the Rose in June, a beautiful sunny day, with members of the Aon and Hope and MSR, all kind of thinking about and celebrating the work that is happening right here. And so one of the, I guess one of the imperatives of our particular group, our lab, is to really identify what we're learning from the Rose. You know, why is it that it's a model of best practices? What is replicable? What can we share with others so that others learn from this process? Of course, it's an amazing network of people, and understanding the network of people that come together to make this project a success is really important. So it's not only that we're willing and able, but that the imperative is really to bring about change. And if one person, one organization in this network of organizations fails in that, or doesn't take on the same challenges as the rest of the group, then the process can fail. So for us, it's been very important to understand the financing piece of this, the architectural piece of this, the developer, the construction managers, how all of these pieces come together to make a project where it's possible for success to happen. When does that happen? Why does it happen? What's the imperative? What's the intention of everyone to help this process going forward? This is an early, you did this, Kamar, right? Kamar is one of the research fellows in our lab. This was an attempt, we're designers, so we like to visualize things, and we like to look for relationships between organizations and forces and factors that help us to understand what we're confronted with. So as you see, the materials piece of this is just one piece of a very complex structure. And it's an incredibly important piece. In our case, it's something that we're really kind of focusing on, but we can't consider it out of context. We need to consider how this piece of it relates to everything in the affordable housing understanding of a construction project. So whereas we're focusing on this, we really need to understand where change is possible, and why change is possible, and when change is possible. So a lot of this mapping allows us to think about kind of strategies and tactics that organizations can learn from that can help them move this process forward, right? It's not enough to do a project like this once. It's really important for us to understand how it's possible to do it again and again and again, learning from this baseline that's set up at the Rose and improving and developing systems that are better, more comprehensive, and are healthier for the people who live in this context. It's so funny, I hadn't seen your funnel diagram. As Reese was talking, I was thinking about when I first came into this area, which was when I was having conversations with Bill over a year ago, and wondering why. I'm an architect by training. I've been teaching for a long time. I haven't done any research in this area till a year ago. I was remembering how difficult it is to be confronted with all of this information and how potentially worrying it is. It's scary. When you see pictures of babies and you think of your own children and your family, it's very difficult to kind of respond to that information. So one of the initiatives that we've taken on as a lab is to try and simplify information, not to take away the complexity or the information that's there, but to recognize that we want to change habits, we want to change practice, primarily for specifiers and designers, but for the industry, industry-wide, we want to change practices. And so we want to introduce this material to people in a way that we think is a little bit more accessible. So you wouldn't think this, but we've been working on this diagram for a very long time, and it really is this idea of the Rose, 140 plus materials were taken at the beginning of the process, and to try to think about the living building challenges of filtering system, but other systems too that are imposed on this, including affordability, because that's not often included in these challenges, to end up with 7 product categories, I think, this is 4 months of research to get to what that number might be and what it looks like. That's incredibly important. That's such valuable information. And we as designers are saying, if we know this, if all of these people have spent all of this time and money and effort on this whole process and have come up with materials that we can stand behind, that's incredibly valuable. So this for us was a way of kind of demonstrating this and a kind of revelation for us to understand how we could share that with others. We've also been working, Bill's organization has, the Healthy Building Network, has been working with this idea of the avoidable hazard index. When we have materials, and we have a range of materials, how do we know one is better than another? And what AHI does is it starts to quantify this information in a way that's useful, particularly to designers. So if I'm looking at Marmoleum tile, I'm comparing it to the natural vinyl sheet, and I'm looking at other resilient flooring materials, I can say I probably want a material that doesn't have very much red in it. I'm actually looking for materials that have a nice white field there. This is translation of Bill's material. This is work in process. But it was a way for us to, instead of wading through a lot of very technical information, to graphically interpret information in a way that's impactful, that allows us to make decisions. And if I'm in the affordable housing realm, I may be saying, maybe I have enough money for Marmoleum, maybe I don't, maybe I'm looking at product sample 4, but if I look at both of those two materials, they're so much better than the materials in the middle in terms of their toxicity. So it's a kind of an evaluative tool for us. It also has a lot of science and information behind it. But as a kind of first blush at helping us make decisions, it's a very useful tool, I think.
Yeah, because most of us can't read chemical.
No, and we can't even pronounce chemical formula, actually, so we're challenged by that. We also took that Bill has not seen this before, this is just working,
this is great.
Working on this week. But this was thinking about, again, how we translate this information, and we start to rank it both on toxicity, so we've got red to green at the top. We're going to flip affordable and expensive because we realize that mathematically being less than 0 is not good, so we want to be, the affordable will be on the right and expensive will be on the left. But it's a way of starting to say, again, if I'm an architect, I could look at, the greens and the yellows there and think that actually they're much, much better than these 4 materials on the bottom. And then I could rank them in terms of affordability and expense. What's also interesting for us in this is it starts to think about how we can work with manufacturers where we have to do the kind of transformations we need to. There aren't that many options out there. And as designers, it's incredibly frustrating to say, I have a choice of 2 things. This is not my world. I want a little bit more of a choice here. So by putting the names of the manufacturers in this diagram, we start to see this as a tool to impact the way they think about the opportunities that could exist for them. They can say, well, Interface actually makes some great carpets too. In this case, that carpet isn't particularly good, but if I saw my name in the red zone, I would, as a manufacturer, be wanting to push my product up into the green and definitely into the affordable category as I think about the market. So again, it's a tool for us to try to think about change. This is we have a materials lab, we have a materials library at my school at Parsons in New York, and part of the function of the library is to educate students who will become future designers. So one of the ways that we're looking at the library and the intersection with the research work that we're doing is once we have some knowledge, once we have information that has been vetted that we can all stand behind, we'd like to share that both in the context of our library so that we only have healthy materials in our library. If I'm a student, if I'm a Masters of Architecture student, and I'm thinking about specifying materials for my project, I want to make sure I'm not using phthalate-ridden vinyls. I want to make sure I'm using really good, healthy floor. And our library will be a repository of that information. We also want to celebrate the work of the Rose in this context and share it with others. So highlighting what was learned from the Rose in this context, this very kind of local context for us was particularly important. Finally, we are designers, and actually what we fundamentally care about is the buildings that we design, for all the reasons that we're all invested in this material. And this idea of home, and I know Gina talks about this, everybody I've met in this project talks very meaningfully and strongly about the notion of home, but that's why we're invested in this. We're not invested in this to for idle academic reasons. We're really interested in making better places for people to live. And so this was an image that was created by some students when we were working in Skid Row in Los Angeles, but this idea that home is always very hopeful. You know, it's flying in the air. It's really this place of refuge, but also of this safety and beauty there, and that for us is why we're invested in this one.
So before I wrap up with the last few slides, we're going to have an activity I thought of a minute ago. I was sitting there thinking about having everyone smell. What do you smell?
Kind of already did that.
Yeah,
I was
isn't it?
amazed.
When you come into buildings that have just gotten finished with construction, and this one, I'm wondering if some of the paint is still wet, because I know you see people putting stuff all over the place. You smell the new building smell, or like the new car smell. Well, you don't want that. That's exactly what's poisoning us, and that's what we associate to that exciting new smell. That is a terrible thing. And actually the contractors here were complaining to Reese that we don't know kind of where we are in the punch list or where we are, because when we walk in the units, we can't smell if the sealant was on the floor. So what a celebration. We're shocked by not being able to smell.
There still is more education to go.
There is. There's a lot. The other part of all of this, there's oftentimes, I've told this to Bill before, I am outraged. I don't want to know any of this. I don't want to read a chemical. I thought I was done with chemistry. I was not good at it in high school. I was terrible. I know my mom's here. My teacher said, and this is true, I'm not just making it up, he said if there's one thing Gina's going to learn out of this class, is she will never be a chemist. That's what he said. And so I am just pissed that I have to think about this as a consumer, that I just can't go buy a tablecloth or a floor, and I have to be the one to figure out what that means. And I often tell this story. I think about how absurd that is. It would be like me flying out to New York and coming to visit Allison, and before I sat in my seat on the plane, I went in the cockpit, took a look around, see the gauges are looking good, read the files, and thought there was anything there I should know about. How absurd. I'm going to be arrested, of course, in that scenario. But this is the same thing. Why the heck do we, as consumers, have to, we have to be aware. We can't be totally oblivious, but we should not have to do this. We should be able to go and buy something and put it in our homes. We should know what's in it, where it can go, how it affects our health. The reality is we're not there yet, so we have to take a stand, but we also have to be outraged and put the responsibility back on this industry who is using all these chemicals and putting these things out there. So we have to kind of work jointly now. We're not at odds, but we have to work jointly to figure this out, because it's real. So there are tools and resources out there. HBN has a lot of them, and I'll talk through two in a minute, but there are the Green Screen, International Living Future Institute. You've heard Reese talk about Declare. LEED building, that you've heard about the LEED standard. They use Cradle to Cradle. There's also this really great health product declaration. That's a consortium of a lot of manufacturers, something Healthy Building Networks put into place. Years ago, working with Google, Bill and his team put together this, it's called the Pharos Project, and this is just a clip of one of the products you can pull up, and it has, I think, 60,000 some chemicals in it. Bill, yes, that talks about whether they cause cancer or endocrine interrupters, and you can go on and look to see what the problem is. It also has, other kinds of products, and we're trying to build this product base and get it out there, because if every design team had to do what Reese and his team did to figure out this, that is ridiculous. So that's Pharos. The other thing, and this is one that I had an aha moment yesterday, the Voided Hazard Index that the team is working on to compare products. So I took the names of different products off. This is something the rows will go through. We will be looking at this floor compared to the stinky one we could have put in. We were looking at, the different products. So this is a generic one on two products, a linoleum product and a vinyl sheet floor, and the recommended adhesives. So it shows on persistent and bioaccumulative toxins, I'm starting to learn how to say these things, There was none in this vinyl product, but there was, I should also say, this is for 1,000 square feet of the product. So basically a 2-bedroom apartment where a family is going to be living. None in one product, 16.2 pounds in the vinyl sheet floor. Occupational carcinogens, 0.05 versus 3.26. And again, not perfect, especially down here, and I understand that 881.9 pounds has more to do with the adhesives, which are really terrible violator. But still better than this. So in the yellow, what you'll see, this is what we'll start to be able to do is quantify. This is what we've avoided, how many pounds. So of this 1,000 square feet in this one apartment, 16.2 pounds avoided here, and you can see how this goes. So you get over 126 pounds of known toxins removed from choosing this over this. And then when you multiply it, let's pretend that's the rows, 90 units, right? 126 times 90 pounds, 11,340 pounds. That's over 5.5 tons in one product, in one building. That doesn't talk about counters or paint or the drywall, everything else, and 5.6 pounds or tons. And when I first did, I thought that's gotta be wrong because that sounds too much. But that is the math. So you can see the impact that the more we start making these changes, building after building after building, family after family, and you think of that, the not only people living in there, working on it, in the manufacturing, at those communities that are getting spewed out there, it is horrifying. So the call to action, you know, this is hard stuff. It's complicated things. It's almost uncomfortable to even start asking because I don't know what I'm really asking, and it might be more expensive than I can really afford. But I want to just talk about how if we all start asking, we all will start this movement. And I had a moment myself about 2 weeks after I took my new job. I went to get a mattress for Calvin, my son. And I walked in the mattress store and I had been hearing about fire retardants and all this stuff. And so I asked the sales lady, Miss Courage, and said, can I ask about the chemicals or, you know, or their flame retardants or whatever? And she kind of stumbled and said, well, you know, I think they're doing better. And I said, well, you know, I just want to do my due diligence. I want to ask these questions. And she did say a goofy thing like, well, you know, you wear clothes and that's like another layer of skin and that will protect you. And I went, okay. So I didn't call her on it because I know we're all figuring this out. So I pressed her on it and I said, well, how do I know? Do you have anything? And she fumbled around. It took her 10 minutes. She came back out with a, you know, copy of whatever seal of approval it had. I didn't know what it meant and I haven't shared it with Bill and the rest of the team yet to see what it means. But I felt really good that I asked. She had that conversation. I just thought, what would it feel like if the next person came in and asked her, or 2 other people the next day? She would start asking the rep who's bringing that mattress in, saying, I'm having people ask me what's in this. Can I find out? Can I learn? So how can I talk to people about that? So that's an easy thing for us all to do. Keep asking. No, you're going to get confusion, or we don't tell, you know, that's a secret, you know, protected, you know, secret of our ingredients, we're not telling you. But keep asking, and that's where we're going to get this movement, and that's where we're going to get the big change. So with that, we're here to answer a few questions, and if it's really technical, Bill's here. James.
I have a question. Hi, I'm James. So as we saw some really great charts up there, the red boxes and the cool cross chart showing affordable and expensive and healthy and not healthy and all these different symbols and these different organizations looking at this data, where are we at as an industry that if I just go into Slumberland and want to buy a bed or a couch, that there's something simple. I mean, I think about the nutritional labels that took a long time to standardize to get on food, and we still only look at those probably 2% of the time.
We still make a lot of bad choices.
Yeah, we still make a lot of bad choices, but at least having the information so that you could even make a choice around between 2 different chairs or something around that. I'm just kind of curious.
Bill would answer that because Bill, you've been kind of tackling. I mean, the challenge is really that it's a very complicated question, exactly what's in your product. And part of it is this transparency and declaring, asking people who make these products to declare the content of their product. A lot of the time people don't do that, so there's no way of knowing, labeled or not, what's in there. So I think that's what Bill and his organization have been doing for a long time, advocating for that kind of level of declaration and transparency, right? So that's the first challenge, is to have honesty in the industry to understand what's in the product. And then to take that information and there are tools you can use. Industry manufacturers can declare through this health product declaration, so they can declare the content of their product. And then Pharos, which is a tool that Bill's organization maintains, can take that information and translate that information into a form that tells you what the toxics are in the product. The next step, which is really kind of the label of looking at something and saying, oh, this looks like it could be good, I can buy it, is really, I think one of the challenges, what would that look like?
So one of the other things I was going to add to all this, and been thinking a lot about with the materials, is the next piece of it, is it not just affordable, but what is its durability moving forward into the future? Because the reason so much of this came about was because we were pursuing durability on things. We wanted all these materials to look perfect for a really long time. We didn't want to do the maintenance because that costs money. So we moved into creating chemical soups on our materials because we didn't want to do the maintenance and we wanted them to look perfect.
And that's kind of a design, actually. Designers were asking for that, so we're part of the problem.
We're part of the problem.
Yeah, so changing our practice, I think, is important.
But I think it's going to be very important to look at how, measuring after this, how are those materials actually doing? And so what we found is the trend right now on a lot of the materials that were in their infancy and making their way into declare were items that were more replaceable. So carpets, furniture, elements that people would typically change out on a 7 to 10 year type of schedule. What is starting to finally make its way are materials that are meant to be in a building for 50 years. And that's the harder part right now, because those are kind of long-term things where people have to do a lot of hard work on to make sure that those things are really going to last and endure. But right now the industry has been mostly focused on the 7 to 10 year products. So there has been great movement on floor, there's been great movement on paint and those other areas because those are readily changeable and we accept them, we're going to change those out. But I think the next piece is really getting after the long-term pieces.
Sure. It's recording. I think it's over here. For durable goods like building products and furnishings, it's very difficult for the average consumer to actually be heard through the interaction you have at the mattress store. Not that it's not bad, because it's signaling what the companies need to do, but by the time that translates to a change in the formulation of the product, we only buy mattresses every few years, whereas consumers were buying paint for our homes fairly regularly, but flooring, furnishings, appliances. That's why the institutional purchasing is so important, because that's where you really have the market impact of, as soon as you begin to specify materials in the thousands of square feet range, manufacturers actually really start to listen to you. And in the higher ends of the market, what we've found with healthcare institutions, for example, they have the ability to ask manufacturers to zero out ingredients in their floors and carpets and wall coverings, and they get a response from that. What I think is so powerful about this project is as we begin to have that dialogue from the affordable housing industry to the manufacturing industry, we're going to be talking about ordinary products, everyday people's products, not premium products. And the manufacturers will listen when they see that it's a concern and when they see that there's a market for these materials. And that's the way we have the market impact, through institutional purchasing and institutional specs. The work that Reese done is just incredible, and the dedication that his firm showed to this project is just phenomenal. And most companies and most men and women in the seat don't stick with it as much. And so we have to make the tools more responsive to professionals. It's still not going to be something that we'll go online as an individual before we go into the store and be able to get a very easy answer. That's a long way off. But the ability of the professionals in their field to really include this as a value-added service at the design level is really going to be the future of transformation. But even that, the work that we're doing with Parsons is so incredible because the information is so dense. Someone's got to draw it out into those wonderful slides, my first time seeing them today, where you start to say, oh, now I get it. Now I see where this product finds. And we will always be there to back it up to make sure that when you see that representation in colors and shapes, that there are data, deep data, that justify every placement of every name and every product on that scale. And we're really beginning to see, I think, a fairly swift response from manufacturers as they see that it begins to make a difference in how you build a building like this. And then to be able to take people in and to sit here and not smell the new building first day it opens is really kind of speaks for itself.
Any questions?
I had a quick comment and a question, I guess. Just in terms of replicability, a project like this is awesome because there's such a great impact. And I think there's certain donations and things that come with it just because it's exciting and new. I think for individual developers to continue the trend, sort of like the mattress example, to the extent that we can include as many as possible, those questions then become products that those suppliers have to look at with regularity, and then it becomes something that's more available. So I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of simple things you can do to
Right.
reduce. So like drywall, for instance, just by making one, is this one? Yeah. Just by making one change on the drywall specification, you can take all of the vinyl dust out of the joint compound. It doesn't cost any more money. But we didn't know that actually until we started really investigating. It was like, oh my God, this drywall compound is 20% vinyl. I didn't know that. And the guys were sanding it like crazy, and on other projects, and you walk in and you kind of smell it. And in here, we removed that, but it didn't cost any more. That is something we can take, and that can go industry-wide. That doesn't have to be in affordable housing. That should be standard throughout. We should just say, you know what, I don't want to use it. Now, there was an issue on schedule because those products dry slower. And so the reason that stuff is in there is because it dries fast. And they love using it for punch list completion too. And so we've had several debates about speed over reducing toxins.
You will almost always have that. The reason things dry fast is because chemicals volatilize quickly. They evaporate into our air faster than the water. And that is like, you have to decide what's your value in there. And you can save time on the schedule. And I know time is money, but it is coming at a cost to the workers' respiratory health, to anyone who visits the building, and all along the supply chain. Somebody had to manufacture that, and that factory is a very unhealthy place to work, and there's a community around that factory. And I guarantee you that is not an affluent community around that factory where all these fumes are coming out every single day, all year, as they make this for every construction project. So it really becomes a question of values for now. We can re-engineer the chemistry, and there are movements afoot to re-engineer the chemistry, but they need a greater demand from the market. They need a greater commitment. So I love the approach of we all have to do our part in these big problems. This is really a part that we can do to say that we want to prioritize health in the best way we can for now, and over time, there will be other solutions that we can get the convenience back.
Yeah, so my quick question was, your great little graphic with the red bars and just that sort of quick visual thing, how are you going to disseminate that? That'd be really great.
I don't know. I mean, we don't want to commit to some online tool, right? So part of our strategy is really to think of how we can share information that is accurate and accessible to specifiers and architects and designers. And I think probably sharing it with existing tools rather than creating some new tools. So we haven't even discussed this, but it seems like it's a good Pharos HBN kind of alignment, and they're creating the data and we can translate it, and where it would sit in relationship to that tool, I think is something that we would need to kind of think about. But yeah, it has to be available. Because our colleagues say, well, thank you very much for telling us that we're creating toxic environments now. How do we change? What are the products we should use? Right? And that's the challenge. So we need, our colleagues need it right now, like today, because they're specifying stuff all the time.
So one of the ways it will be disseminated is part of the reasons I was hired was, do I need the, you hear me? one of the reasons why I was hired and moved on to this is to make sure that this information gets out there, because one of the things we always talked about on the roads, it needs to be practical and replicable, and we made promises to everybody that we would share this, and it got really, really hard sitting in the seat I was in to be able to commit to that. So as part of this work with Parsons and the other groups, one of my roles is to create roundtable conversations. And so we will be having, we've already had some in New York, we're looking for, it's not totally set in stone yet, but probably November 5th here in Minneapolis. So I've been talking to a few people about the work that I've been doing and the interest. And so we're looking at building conversations around the country and creating a roundtable so everybody can be a part of this conversation and people can tell us how do we absorb the information the best. We're creating websites where there'll be interactive communities having these conversations. So stay tuned, because that's one of the things that will help move this forward and help with the communications.
And it'll dictate the tools that are most useful for the widest group of people, I think.
I was wondering if you have developed a CEU that could be done over a lunch hour to architects and designers?
If you come tomorrow morning, we're actually developing this series of modules that come from, well, because we're educators, I mean, I teach. We have a studio we're running this semester actually in New York City. There's a combination of graduate architecture, graduate lighting, and graduate interior design students who are looking at affordable housing in New York City and trying to think of how we impact local developers to change their specification processes. So embedded in our curriculum now is the sense that everything we specify, all the materials we specify have to be vetted in a way that is consistent with the work that these guys have been doing. So to do that, we're currently creating a series of modules for our students, but part of our grant is also to think about how we educate not only future designers, but current designers, how we educate people who are involved in maintenance, the small, right, the painting and cleaning products going forward. So yes, absolutely, this is something that we're looking at.
I have one other thought. Do you happen to know Dr. Denise Guerin at all?
No.
You do?
I went to school, University of Minnesota.
Well, I was going to say, this would be wonderful information for informed design. So if it's not on there,
Yeah, we've actually been talking with the University of Minnesota, with the Department of Public Health, the health department as well, and they actually had put in for a grant application, but it had been, it was denied at the time.
great.
You're right, Denise and Becky and the folks we've been working on with CSPL.
And we would love to share this. I mean, part of our grant is also open sourcing, so anything we create is obviously available to anybody. So if it's useful for other academic institutions or organizations like the AIA.
So we've also been sharing this information with the LBC Collaborative Group that's locally within Minnesota, and so we get together once a month, and so we've been disseminating quite a bit of this information, and then even internally within our office, because for a long time it was kind of me, myself, and I. And so I ended up actually talking about it to the partners in the office and said, we need to begin to really implement this stuff in a much more legitimate way into all of our work. So they actually then agreed to pay for additional research on top of the stuff that we've already done before, which is great because they saw the value of it as well. And so by doing those things, we're now looking very heavily into insulation and making sure that our specs going forward, whether or not the client calls for it, are going to still be the best specs available at good price points too, so that we know what's going into there, so we can really talk about this. And looking at insulation is actually one of the largest volume of materials you're going to put into your building, and it's an unseen thing that goes into everything, it touches everything. And so by getting at that one, will affect change without having to tell you that we affected change, which I think is important.
That's great.
To be clear, the large grant that was provided by JPB Foundation for these 4 groups was really meant to transform the affordable housing industry as a sector that can influence the markets and create demand so that the supply comes. And so it's a 3-year cycle. So we're just, this summer was just the first launch of it. So we are heavy duty into the prep, and this is one of the first conversations and the few that we've had. I think, Bob, you had a question?
Yeah, for Reese. Reese, I asked us for the special materials that you wanted, like the drywall mud, and I'm sure there were 1,000 others. Could you source those locally, most of them?
Yeah, so with the drywall, the interesting thing is though we actually have out of Fort Dodge, Iowa, National Chip. And so that is considered in the area. So we were able to kind of exercise that. One of the things we did have trouble with, though, was even though we said to come from that location, you know, National Chip is a big company, and suddenly stuff would be coming from other places and kind of show up on site, and we'd be like, no, it's not supposed to be here. Well, do I really have to take it off site? Yeah, you do. Sorry. Well, that's going to hold up the schedule. Well, sorry, figure it out again. So there are things that are local to us. The granite countertops are from Cold Springs Granite, which is 60 miles up the road, which is great. You know, the plywood panels that you see here, they are Columbia Forestry products. So they have the special glues in there that are non-toxic. And they are coming out of a mix of Oregon, Washington State, and some source material actually from Minnesota. So we're trying to pay attention to it, but the issue is right now, there aren't enough materials that I can source locally to actually build a building unless I want to go back to mud and wattle. So it's coming. I mean, but it's gonna take all of us to make that change happen.
Can you guys elaborate a little bit more about the cost comparison between something like that and the regular affordable housing approval process, as well as from the architectural side in terms of even like the research work that goes into these facts, like how would that compare if you're right?
Sure, so you can use the flooring as one example. So the base condition that you typically see in a lot of affordable housing is vinyl sheet flooring or vinyl composition tile. Installs roughly $1.50 a square foot or so. So then we started looking at, okay, luxury vinyl tile, which is the luxury upgrade. But that stuff actually can have even worse material in it because it tends to be thicker and has a lot more stuff embedded into it to make it look pretty and be very durable. And that's installing for $250, $350, up to $5. If you get the really thick stuff, it goes even higher. And you're just buying thicker layers of vinyl. To bio-based tile, which is what we have in our dwelling units. And it's by Armstrong, and it's not perfect. But in looking at, we could take all of that money and spend it on one material. So, for instance, if we had moved all the way up through and done linoleum throughout, it would have used up all of our grant money. So that material there was going to install at $5.50 a square foot, which, you know, that doesn't sound bad. I can go to a tile shop and whatnot, and you see everything, $5. Yeah, great. But in affordable housing, and you spread it across 90 units, that's a lot of money. And so that's what we were really struggling with, was how do you find a material that can kind of be affordable, try to do less harm, and still be able to be durable and to do the right maintenance on it. So we struggled actually with the correct sealer on that product, and the initial mock-up unit had the wrong sealer, and it smelled to high heaven, and we had to pull it all out and start over, and it was just really looking at that stuff. But that flooring was about a $100,000 upgrade roughly throughout this project for the 90 units. So that's really kind of where we're kind of looking.
Per square foot, can you give the per square foot comparison to the bucket?
So that was installing for $250 a square foot, so $1 upgrade.
So the reality is that most of the materials did cost more that we had to pay for. There were a lot of them that came in, or a handful of them that came in at par, that were just as durable,
Right.
etc. And so we're starting to build a library. What we did see though over the course of the time, kind of just before we started construction, even through when we started construction, new materials were available that weren't before. So we do think that sharing the library of materials that we did, find FR and then higher will be important, and we're working with groups across the country to discover those and create a library that we can share, so not everybody has to research. The design, as you mentioned, was also an upgrade because there were a lot of hours, a lot that Reese actually did charge for because it was on his couch at home. But there is an upgrade for architects to do all that research, to call and beg and plead and try for transparency and not have anything back or get something
Yeah,
short
so
of that.
we ended back, on getting the calls back, less than 50% would even return our phone calls on stuff. And we said, okay, well, that's off the list. Not even gonna look at it because I can't find information, so it's off. Looks great, but I don't know what's in it.
And the original agreement we had was about a $60,000 upgrade to do some research on 20 materials. And over time, there were some upgrades, and there certainly was some pro bono work, et cetera. So I know that price, the design work to do the research ended up being way more than 60,000, but thankfully we had partners that were committed to figuring it out. But not all partners are, but all of those things are real, and the more that we can push this and make it standard, and as products become available, that will come down. Just like with everything, there's this spike and it'll come down, and we have to kind of push our way through that and do what's reasonable. Take the $2.50 upgrade, we couldn't do the $5.50 upgrade, and it's a much better thing. I guarantee next year we're gonna have a better opportunity. Lots of questions. I just want to check, I'm getting looks from the tour guides over here, like one more minute, one more question.
My question will be real quick.
Okay,
I've lived in this area since 2005. I come from Nebraska, so my base is, I've been an RN for 50 years, plus I'm from an agriculture state. My question is, when you put the plants in outside, will that be an ecosystem of some kind, so the filtration of the way the water's going through the plants?
Absolutely is. And actually, what you see with the big kind of ditch out there is the soil preparation. There's another 3 feet of prepared, specially prepared soils that are actually going in, because the plants actually need something good to grow in as well. You can't just stick the plant in and expect it to do everything it needs to do. So the idea is that the landscape around is part of an ecosystem. All the plants that are in here are doing specific functions. So these that you see out here will be filtering rainwater and contaminants as they make their way to the
Back into the water.
back to the garden area that will then be reused for irrigation. So any water that is collected off here and the plants don't use in here and filter down, make their way to the cistern, and then they can get recirculated again and actually then grow vegetables with it, because it has been filtered and decontaminated.
Because our church just got done doing this, so we've got the same system.
Yeah.
So I kind of wondered if that is what you, and I'm always looking at autoimmunes. I've been studying autoimmunes for a long time,
so we can stick around for questions. There's tours happening right now. We'll be available permanently for questions. We can give you our cards, and we'll be hanging out in conversations here in the Twin Cities. Stay tuned so we can get much deeper and more focused. So thank you for coming. And raise your hand if you're going to start asking.